Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. I'll start the video off by saying I might not be as enthusiastic in this episode as I am in normal episodes. I'm not going to go into any details, but there's a large amount of issues going on in my personal life right now. Like I said, I'm a private person, as I've told you guys before. I'm not going to say anything about it, but A, please respect my privacy, and B, please bear with me as we make it through this video. But we are going to work today on the plumbing list for the car. Now, I put a poll up on the community section of my YouTube page, and there was an overwhelming response that you guys wanted to see me write this list out. And it won't be the most interesting video, it won't be very action-packed, but we need to go through and figure out all of the AN lines and things of that nature that need to be purchased to plumb this car and to make it so all the fluids and the airs stay in the engine and in the various systems where they need to be. So I have a blank sheet of paper and a pen here, and I guess we'll go ahead and start figuring out some of these lines. We'll go system by system. So we'll need to account for the oiling system, the cooling system, the fuel system, and the pressure system, meaning the lines going from the manifold to wastegates to boost control solenoids, what have you. So I guess a good place to start would be the oiling system. So let me raise the car up and we can determine what we need in regards to lines for the dry sump system and go from there. To start off with the dry sump system, we have 4 scavenge sections on the pan and 4 scavenges on the bottom of the pump itself. And all of these, I believe, are number 12s. Let me get this cap threaded off of this fitting here. And I have a small section of number 12 hose that I believe was at one point an oil return for another car. And it is in fact the number 12. So we have 90-degree fitting on the pan sump, and we will have another 90-degree on the bottom side of the dry sump pump. And it looks like all of these are going to follow that same routing. So now that for that simple section there, we understand what we're working with in regards to angles, we can go ahead and also measure out what we'll need as far as length for line is concerned. So let me go and grab a tape measure and then we can do that. So now with tape measure and calculator, we're making the math a little bit easier. We can go ahead and measure out our overall length that we need for number 12 hose for this section of the plumbing system. So I like to measure a little bit over what we'll actually need in regards to line, as I would rather have excess than too little. So if we go from one fitting to the other, we'll call that 7 inches for line 1. So 7 entered into the calculator plus section 2, 17 plus 17 plus 3, we'll call that 19. And finally, number 4, 21. Plus 21 gives us 64 inches total that we need for this section of our plumbing system. So, we can get my sheet here, and I can write out dry sump scavenge lines rather. We will need 8 number 12 90-degree hose ends, and we will need at least 64 inches of number 12 hose to make all of that work. Now, one of the handiest tips and tricks that I know in building lines is to always keep your extra fittings and hose and just extras sitting around, because even though what we're going to look at now is the dry sump return, and this is a number 16 male fitting as opposed to a number 12 hose here, we can still use the hose to determine the angles that we'll be working with. So the dry sump return comes out of the top of the pump. You can see down here, maybe you can, maybe you can't, and it comes to this top port on the tank here. And I can tell by using this number 1290 that a 90-degree fitting puts me, or 90-degree hose end rather, puts me right at the angle that I want to be at to build this line, or to have it connect to the top of the tank. And I can also see down at the bottom to have the line track in the direction, in the position that I'd like. This needs to be at either a 45 or a 60-degree angle. So I will order both 45 and 60s for the pump side, order a 90 for the tank side, and if we measure out our distance, a straight line puts us at 13 inches, so we'll add an additional few inches to that, as this line will have a little bit of a swoop to it, and that will net us the line that we need to get the oil from the tank up to the pump, or the pump to the tank rather. Now I will also need to figure out where in the oiling system I'm going to locate the filter, but that doesn't need to be determined right this moment. I can figure that out a little bit later on, and we will cross that bridge when we come to it. So we have our list now for all of the oiling components, or at least everything that I can determine right at this moment. We have the dry sump scavenge lines, the feed from the tank to the pump, the feed from the pump to the engine, the return line from the pump to the tank, the turbo oil feed, and the turbo oil return. And these lists are a little bit excessive because I'm getting multiple fittings that may or may not be used at a given position, as I'm pretty particular about the angles of hose ends that I use. So rather than ordering one that I'm not sure if it's correct, having to wait for shipping to get me another one, I'm just going to go ahead and order multiples, or not multiples, but order multiple different options rather for hose ends, as they can always get stuffed in my box of extras, which comes in extraordinarily handy when you are figuring out lines like this. And AN lines are one of the things that I never return. If I got the wrong thing, whatever, throw them in the extra box, and after some period of time you end up with a collection like this. All different hoses, all different sizes, different fittings, so on and so forth. And having a collection like this makes jobs like this much easier, as you can pull fittings out of the box. You can test angles like I just showed you guys with the oil return, or the dry sump oil return, and you can figure out what your angles are, where everything needs to go, and it makes this a little bit less of a painful process. Now that we have the oiling system figured out for the most part, we can go ahead and move on to the cooling system. I went ahead and I printed out this little coolant flow diagram for a 2JZ engine. And although the cooling system on this car is anything but factory, we're going to follow the same methodology that Toyota did and follow the same routing for this cooling system. So let me go ahead, I'll study this diagram for a couple of minutes, figure out where we need to move water to and fro, and then we can go ahead and figure out our plumbing list for it. Following this coolant flow diagram, we go from pump through block, through head, through radiator, back to pump. So this is going to work the exact same way. We go have our pump down there, we go from pump over to the block, coolant will go through the block, come back up through the head, out of the fill pot, from the fill pot to the top port on the radiator, to the bottom port on the radiator, back over to our pump inlet. So with that in mind, let's flip my page back. We start with water. We have pump to block, head to radiator. We have radiator to pump, and then we have coolant miscellaneous, which will be the ORB drain that goes on the bottom of the radiator. The pipe and AN bung here are for the port on the back side of the head, which you guys will not be able to see. I can barely see it with my naked eye, let alone trying to shove a camera in there. Now the point of having that port on the back side of the cylinder head is to give steam and hot water a place of egress. If you don't have that, you'll be more likely to torch a cylinder head or cause undue damage. I guess think about like a steam port system on an LS engine, and this is kind of the same principle. So I'm not sure how I'm going to tie that line into the rest of it. I'll figure that out as we come to it, but I have the bulk of everything that I need for the cooling system listed here, and that will be more than enough to get me started at least. So now that the cooling system and the oiling system are written up for all intents and purposes, we can move on to the fuel system now, which the fuel system will be relatively simple from the rear of the car, but as we move more and more forward, it becomes more and more complex, as we have a dual rail system, we have a regulator there, and if I can, I would like to integrate a surge tank into this system as well, just to aid the mechanical fuel pump and not having to draw fuel from the rear of the car the entire way to the front here. Now I know that it can be a little bit of an issue with pressure drop, having the mechanical pump do all of the work. So the way that the surge tank works is, think of it as a secondary small fuel cell. The way that that works is you have your main fuel tank, in this case it's in the rear of the car. You will have an electric pump off of that fuel tank that feeds the surge tank. The surge tank itself has its own small electric pump in it that will then feed fuel to our mechanical pump here, allowing it to do its job. Now the return side of the system is pretty interesting, and it's very sensible. You have your normal return off of the fuel rails or off of the regulator up here, that fuel returns to the surge tank. Now you need a way to meter the surge tank, right? Otherwise you'll be constantly overfilling it, building pressure up and possibly bursting it. Well, not necessarily. Or I guess the metering system is a return from the surge tank, or off of the surge tank, back to the main fuel tank. So think of it as a double return system, and you're always keeping the surge tank full, always giving the mechanical pump a good supply of fuel to be happy and make the engine run the way that it should. So hopefully that makes sense. If not, then I'm sorry, but that's the best way I can think to explain it right now. But with that being said, we need to raise the car back in the air again, and we can figure out from the back forward how we're going to plumb the fuel system. Back here at the rear of the car, we can start going over the fuel system. So we have fitting coming off the back of the fuel cell here. This line will come up, snake along the bottom side of the cell. We'll go up over top of the subframe and probably shoot through this gap right here to keep it away from, you know, the axles and the drive shaft and other rotating components. The feed line will then come along these brake lines right here, which don't mind them being a little bit floppy now. You know, likely tie everything up using these factory studs along the bottom side. The feed line will make its way up here to our mechanical pump, or it could go to the surge tank, I'm not 100% sold if I'm going to implement that or not, as there isn't a whole lot of space, and I really don't want to mount it down along the side here, on the side of the block, you know, in case it would at some point throw a rod through the block. I don't want to have it hit a vessel full of accelerant for a fire, so that we'll have to cross that bridge when we come to it. For the time being, I'll likely just run it as is with a one-way valve, or a check valve rather, to keep fuel in the lines and to keep the pump primed. The initial prime will be a little bit difficult to achieve, but by the time it is primed and having fuel constantly in the line, I don't think it'll be a big issue, at least not for the immediate life of this car. But with that being said, we will have the line come up, go into the pump. From the pump, it will go to a Y block around the backside here. We will feed two number 10 lines, one to the backside of each one of the rails. The bottom rail we can see here houses billet atomizers, which would function as secondary injectors if and whenever the car sees enough boost and airflow that it necessitates that much fuel. I have ID 1700s on the top, which those would be the primary injectors, the drive around injectors, the general function injectors, and these atomizers would be, they're 500-pound atomizers, which is a 5,000 plus cc injector, and that's more than enough fuel for this thing on methanol, let alone the ethanol that it will run on. But we'll go from the pump to the back side of the rails, feed those. On the front side here, you can see we have one here and then one up there, two number 8 ORB fittings, that those will Y and go back to the regulator. That is, you probably can't see it from down here, but the regulator, those two return lines will go to the regulator, and the regulator will run back to the top of the fuel cell, where I have a return fitting with a tube that goes down into the cell to prevent cavitation. So it's kind of a rough overview of the fuel system, not super complex, but it kind of is what it is. So to wait for a little bit till I get an extra set of hands here to help me string the tape measure along, but we'll get this all measured out, get this portion spec'd out, and then we can move on to the pressure side, or the air side, of the AN lines. Alright, so went through and have the laundry list of plumbing stuff figured out for this car, or at least as far as I can tell for the time being. So we start off, have all the oiling stuff, that's both the dry sump as well as feeding oil to the turbo. We have all of the coolant stuff, that is the pump through the engine, through the radiator, back to the pump. We have the fuel system, that is from the tank up to the pump, from the pump through the rails, from the rails to the regulator, into the regulator, or from the regulator back to the tank. And the last one, we figured out the transmission. So from the trans case up to the trans cooler and back to the case again. Now you can see I have boost written out here, and that will be the lines going from the bottom of the intake manifold over to either the wastegates or the two boost control solenoids, wherever they may be located. However, I'm going to hold off on figuring that out for the time being, as I obviously don't have the solenoids mounted, nor am I 100% sure if I want to use actual AN lines or use the plastic push lock fittings or what have you. So that will be something I need to figure out at another time, but right now I have as concise of a list as I need to order the vast majority of the components for this. So I have everything listed out here, and the next thing I'll need to do is to make a spreadsheet with part numbers and what have you, so that way I can send that list off to make the job of whoever is assembling all of these fittings and everything for me that much easier. So we're not going to do that today. I will come back in tomorrow. We'll pick up there after I've made the spreadsheet, because I really don't think you guys want to watch me just peck at a keyboard for a couple of hours to do this, but we'll get through that, and I can show you guys how I set spreadsheets up for stuff like this to make it easier, and we'll reconvene then. Alright, we are back the following day after we went ahead and wrote up the vast majority of the laundry list for the plumbing portion of the Supra project. So I have that list right here, and I went over that with you guys yesterday. And today we are going to take that list and make it into an organized and readily referenceable spreadsheet here on Microsoft Excel. Now, there's a wide variety of uses that Excel can be applied to, and it is one of the most powerful softwares, not only in the Microsoft Office family of products, but just in general. And I am not an expert on it whatsoever, but I can kind of fake it till I make it and make spreadsheets that, like something like this, will be an organized list with part numbers and descriptions and quantities and everything else that I can send to vendors to make it easier for them to decipher what parts I do need and what have you. So we're starting with a bare book here, a bare sheet, and I'll go ahead and configure this in an organized manner that makes sense to me, and that should be able to be easily deciphered by a representative at a vendor. So go ahead, tripod you guys, and I will get started on making this book. Alright, we now have a simple workbook for organizing these plumbing components. So I went ahead and I titled it and split it up into individual sections: 4AN, 6, 8, 10, 12, and 16, as those are all the different sizes of components that I'll be using in regards to AN stuff. So I can go ahead now and begin populating these all these different sections in this table that I've made, and we can get it filled out and give us a way to organize all of these into their appropriate sections. And after some mind-numbing computer work that you guys just saw, we now have everything that I could check off of the list checked off. And there's still a few little items, like stuff like the coolant miscellaneous here. I can't get this threaded pipe that I need, or the stainless weld bung, or a filter. Fuel filter, that is, or so on and so forth, through my supplier and through Vibrant, I guess. But I have just about everything else. Everything that is green on this table is something that I was able to acquire and able to put into my cart, and that is in stock. And we only have this one here and this one here that are the two outstanding parts, and thankfully only one of those two items could prove to be a little bit difficult to acquire. But I have everything added to the cart on my my warehouse's website. So I'll now go ahead and order all of these components, get everything on its way here. And once everything arrives and I can source those last 2 outstanding components, I can go ahead and begin the arduous process of all the plumbing work on this car. So now, with the laundry list completed and the spreadsheet made and everything ordered, I think that will be about the end to this video. So I apologize again for, I know I'm usually not the most enthusiastic person, but for me being even a bit less enthusiastic this video. But like I said, there's a lot going on behind the scenes here, and a lot that I'm just not going to get into in the public eye. So I appreciate you guys for your presumed understanding and presumed respect of my privacy. And before long, once we get through some of the hard times, there will be good times to come. And not to wax philosophic to you guys, but life ends up being a sine wave, and with the peaks there are valleys. And we're in the midst of a valley right now here, but at the edge of each valley is the beginning of upward movement to a peak. So with that in mind, that will be it for this video. So until next time, be sure to subscribe, leave a like, leave a comment, and I will see you guys then.